Object is an instantiation or realized form of a class, which is what we use to store the data. Class itself does not store the data, it is just a blueprint. An object has a state, which is basically data currently stored in its member variables or attributes. The data currently stored in the object determines its state. Even a minute change in data results in a change in the object's state. From the low level perspective or from the physical memory level perspective, you can view the state as a map of bits in the memory space of object. This data or map of bits determines how object behaves when it is used. In other words, state plays a role in shaping object's behavior. Broadly, state of an object can be categorized as valid and invalid. Let us understand it better through this code. We have a student class with the attribute pointer character pointer to hold the name in dynamic memory space. We have integer id. We have set function which receives the id and name and copies it into the name attribute in the dynamic memory space and id into the id attribute. If the name is not valid, then it will set if received name is not valid, it will set the name to null ptr. The display function prints the id and name values. The data is stored in id and name, and deallocate function will release the dynamic memory space that was allocated here. And we have a main function. First, let us talk what is invalid state. Uh, Suppose I create an object of student class using this syntax. Here I create an object, memory is allocated for this object for id and name, that means name pointer character pointer, and that memory space is not initialized with anything. That means anything, any random value can be in that memory space. So to see what is in that memory space, we can display, we call the display function, and we can switch to the terminal and try to execute it here. Compile, link. There is a problem. Yeah, this problem is that it is complaining that this strlen and strcpa functions are not recognized, they are not declared. Therefore, you need to provide the library that will allow these functions in this code. So make sure you include string library. Again to the terminal. When I execute that display function actually displayed this value for id. It doesn't make any sense. This is kind of a random value, whatever information, because the memory is a collection of bits, right? In the bit it could be either 1 or 0. You cannot have any nothing in that space. So based on what is the 1-0 pattern that is that happens to be stored in that memory space, we get the output here. So it is invalid data in id memory space, and again invalid in the name memory space. It happened that the address that is stored in that memory space happened to be the address of the exe file, and the place where the exe file is stored. Therefore, that is also invalid data in the dynamic memory space. Therefore, here we have this object in invalid state. To if you initialize this with the valid data, by calling this set function and passing id and the string in the first and second parameters, or first and second arguments, valid id and a valid string. In this case, this object now is in, after the execution of this line, it will be in a valid state because the data that is stored is valid. We can display the data afterwards and see whether see what is happening there. Now we have a valid data, right? So the object is in a valid state. Now sometimes it can happen that it can be set to um, the, the the data which is not valid. For example, if it's set to -10, so I cannot consider that -10 is a valid data for the id, because id is a positive whole number. And even if the second name is valid, and if id is not valid, that will make this object in invalid state. Or if you have id valid, but the name, let's say 123, I would consider this as an invalid name, because I would not imagine that anyone will have a name beginning with numbers. So this the data that is stored in the name is also not valid. So we can say that at this point, after the execution of this statement, the object will be in invalid state. And you can display, but it will display the data, but still it will be in invalid state. It is always a good practice to keep an object in a valid state. And another point I want to make here is many times the definition of valid state is sort of subjective or context driven. So if the context where the student class is to be used demands the id to be in a higher range of the integer, or higher range in the domain of whole numbers, say from 1001 to 9999, then even in this case 500 will be invalid, 400 or 500 would be invalid. In other contexts, id may be considered valid when it is in a higher range, let's say 22101 to 29999. In this case, even 2000 can be invalid, right? Therefore, it is subjective and it is context driven. In the next recording, I will talk about safe empty state, safe non-empty state, and initial state. Thank you for watching this recording.